Welcome back. We're here with David Standridge, and we're talking about the Supreme Court. I know we're talking about how some of the cases are brought to the court, Supreme Court, and you have to be licensed to. How do you acquire the license? I know I was talking to the AG. Gary King was here. He was mentioning that he had argued a case in front of just recently.
Yeah.
And I forgot to ask him exactly what the process is. I'm sure he's licensed there, that's why he was there. But how is it that you acquire the license? What is that process like?
Well, since I've never been through it, I don't know the details of actually sitting through the process. I know that you have to fill out an application, you have to pay some fees, and be in good standing within the jurisdictions that you already hold the license. And I do know that the Supreme Court holds a swearing-in ceremony, and I don't know how many times a year that happens, but there was one case that I had where I was involved with a lawsuit involving APS, and we tried to petition to the United States Supreme Court, and I was kind of looking forward to going through that process, but I didn't make it that far. So that's what I understand. You fill out the application, you pay some fees, and then you have to submit your paperwork from your jurisdiction showing you're in good standing, and then the Supreme Court will swear you in.
So the justices actually approve you? Do they go through that? Do you go through the process? Do you know if that's the case, or is there some other process in work?
Well, do the justices actually look at your application? I couldn't comment on that. I have to say it's probably left up to an administrative person who puts it together, right?
Would you like to do that at some point?
You know what? I think I would. It sounds like it'd be a great opportunity, but I don't know if I would ever have an opportunity to argue there. I've certainly toured the Supreme Court, but it's a fascinating process to me, and certainly as an attorney, it sounds very appealing to me to do so.
What do you think about the process where the president nominates? I know this is a law of the land, but talk about that a little bit. I know every president comes in and they have a certain amount of appointees do they have to go through because there's justices retiring and all that.
Right. Yeah. And as you know, I mean, a Supreme Court justice serves for life. And the interesting thing is here in 2012, we're still having the same conversation that they had back at the founding of our country when they were establishing the Constitution. Should we have judges who have lifetime appointments? And every time it seems that there's a vacancy, as a country, we seem to have a discussion along those lines because there's a real benefit to having lifetime appointments. It keeps the judicial system away from some of the politicking that can occur because of political parties and such. But on the other hand, another argument can be made that they need to be more accountable to the people and therefore should not be lifetime appointments. Certainly as a country, we have opted to say, let's stick with what our founding fathers did in terms of lifetime appointments. And I think there's a real good discussion in the Federalist Papers about the lifetime appointments and the necessity for keeping lifetime appointments.
They often talk about the good behavior. I think that's just referring to lifetime. I don't think they're actually talking about. I know because I think all I know is there's 2 justices in the past that were impeached. Am I right?
I think so.
Going back way, I have to look.
A long time ago.
It was a long time ago. Nothing in the recent history though, and that's not something that happens all the time. But when you read the history and stuff, these things come up and stuff. The process is very interesting, and I don't think that will essentially ever change where the president nominates them. There is no other way that a justice could be nominated, right? Besides the president. The president has to nominate.
Set by the Constitution. And what I've seen happen over the course of my lifetime is it's become obviously much more politicized within the Senate confirming these nominees. And we've had, whether it's become more politicized or whether it's become more publicized, I don't know which one is more accurate. But we certainly know a lot more now about some of these judicial nominees because of the access we have to media and things along those lines.
I was watching a few years back when Justice John Roberts was he went to the hearing, the Senate hearing. It sounds, there has a political tone to it, and I mean, I'm looking at it from a nonpartisan point of view. It does have a political tone to it. The questions were more in line with what would you do in this case or what would you do in that case. So they're trying to gauge the political views. Do you think that the media should be allowed in these hearings? Because it's a pretty uncomfortable position for that justice to be in, or that soon-to-be justice, right? Do you think they should publicize that? Because it becomes very political at times.
I will tell you, that is a very good question. I will tell you, in my opinion, I think that it should be publicized. I think that we should know who the Supreme Court justices or potential justices are going to be, and make sure that we as the people, and if we don't like the judicial philosophy or the approach that that candidate is using, that we can contact our elected representatives to put pressure on them within the Senate and say, we don't want you voting for them, or we do want you to confirm them. So I think it's part of our democracy, part of open and transparent government, that the media would have a role in that. Sometimes I've heard people joke that the media is the fourth branch of government. I think they play a vital role in making sure that people have an understanding of what I think is a very mysterious branch of government to most people, and that's the judiciary.
So you don't think there's anything wrong with the media being involved in it?
I do not.
Because
right.
when the framers wrote this up, there was no media.
There was no media.
So
right.
I often wonder, would that be something that, how would they look at? How would James Madison look at this, or Thomas Jefferson look at it, if they knew that it's going to be broadcast throughout the world and the world was watching them?
That's
just a thought.
It is. It's an interesting thought, and it's an interesting exercise to think about that. I would have to believe that our founders would probably opt for having media coverage. And the reason I say that is because, you know, they were trying to promote among the people at that time through the Federalist Papers ratification of the Constitution. So they wanted the people to understand and have a knowledge of the workings of their government, because the power is with the people. Likewise, you know, they protected the power of the media through the First Amendment, something very important to us, near and dear to us as Americans. And I would think that they would see it as being kind of a watchdog for the people, so that the people can be informed of their government. After all, you know, it starts off, we the people.
Exactly. Very true. I often wonder what, you know, whenever I'm reading the history, when you look at today's world and 236 years ago,
right.
You often wonder what the founding fathers were thinking.
You're right.
Would be thinking at this point. It's
You're
always it's such a neat subject to me.
It is.
I always like thinking about these things, but I think the judiciary is necessary. It's the law of the land. So once something goes through the Supreme Court, and that's the law of the land, at that point can never be changed unless it goes back through the channels of Congress.
Right. You know what? That is a very deep question, because right now there's some debate, and I think it was really brought up by President Obama during some discussions about whether or not, I'm sorry, not President Obama, but during some of the Republican debates, I think it was Newt Gingrich who brought it up, that it's not the Supreme Court, they're not the ones who have all a monopoly on determining the constitutionality of laws. He was arguing that that's also left up to the executive branch and to the legislative branch. So, you know, once the Supreme Court makes a decision, I think that under our system that can be changed, certainly by the will of the people through acts of Congress, as long as it's within the confines of the Constitution. Certainly by further case law that the Supreme Court may make in the future, it can be changed. So there are different avenues, and certainly through executive orders that the President may enter. Those kind of acts can have an implication on the finality of what the Supreme Court could decide. So certainly we like to think it's the ultimate arbiter of final constitutional issues, but very rarely does it seem to be the last word, because Congress gets involved and the executive branch gets involved.
Yeah, because I often get confused with the executive orders. I know that's something that a lot of the presidents have been using, and some of them use it hundreds of times. So it often confuses people when they look at it and say, well, you know, I don't know if that's a way to bypass certain laws or how that works, because American people often worry about things like that, you know, and it becomes political in that sense. Another question, you remember Bush v. Gore went to, I was listening to Justice Scalia, and we're going to go for a break in a second here. I was listening to him, and he actually said they should never have brought it. Gore should never have brought it to the Supreme Court. And you know, so we'll talk about. I don't know if you want to talk about that. Well, you know,
Yeah,
I thought that was an interesting point.
It is interesting.
That
Absolutely.
you should never have brought it in. We're going to take a break and come back with David Standridge.